What's going on, everyone? I'm delighted you returned for the final chapter of this video series, as well as where I plan to take my setup now that I have 3 coordinators. I'd like to leave you with the best practices for building up your own mesh network and hopefully address some of your questions in the process. This will explain how Zigbee networks work and what makes them better than other wireless technologies. Hopefully that sounds interesting to you. Otherwise, why else would you be here? Well, let's dive right in. So let's explain the Zigbee network. Zigbee is a 2.4 gigahertz wireless communications technology designed for robust, low bandwidth networks. Mesh networks are created by linking devices together, and this is referred to as a topology, which also explains how devices on a network are linked. Many of you are probably already familiar with Wi-Fi networks, so comparing the Zigbee and Wi-Fi topologies side by side may help you understand them better. So here we see a Wi-Fi topology, and it is using a star topology, which just means that each device can only talk to this Wi-Fi access point and nothing else. So these networks have a lot of bandwidth, but a small range, and they don't usually fix themselves if something goes wrong. So if this Wi-Fi access point goes down, your whole network goes down. Zigbee networks, on the other hand, use a mesh topology in which all devices, or nodes as they're called, can talk to each other and form a network. That doesn't mean that Zigbee networks can't use a star topology, which is what my first video showed. I had the one coordinator and it was going out and talking to the individual devices, and that was the star topology. Now, a mesh network differs from a Wi-Fi network in that the devices or nodes here can connect with any other router in range, allowing the devices to communicate even if the coordinator fails. So if some of these devices here were routers as well as end devices, and your Zigbee coordinator went down, you can see that it would be able to connect to other devices, and other devices would be able to connect through it to get to other devices. So officially, the topologies that can make up a Zigbee network are a star, like we saw with the Wi-Fi, a mesh, which is what we see here, and a hybrid, or sometimes called a cluster tree. And that's where you can have a star topology like we see here, but then one of the routers branches off and creates a mesh. So it'd be, imagine this was all Zigbee, and imagine that this device here connected to here, and then you have this other network or a mesh network here, which would be, as I was saying, a cluster tree or a hybrid network. Okay, so I had planned to show you the 3 different Zigbee devices from Sonoff, which was my 3 previous videos. And I know that there is another dongle available, but I kind of talked about it in the last video, and I felt that these 3 would suffice. And my intention has always been to show you how to use these devices to create a quote-unquote true Zigbee mesh network at the end of my series. As demonstrated in the previous 3 videos, however, if you only use the one coordinator, you're only going to have a star network. So this final setup will make your Zigbee network more reliable and let you cover a larger area, making it a good fit for your home automation setup. Also, because Zigbee networks are self-healing, if a router or coordinator fails, the network will reroute messages around the problem area to make sure that they get to their destination. Even though you might lose control in Home Assistant if your coordinator goes down, with routers in the mix, you would still be able to communicate with your devices if you're using switch buttons and the like to control devices. Okay, so the methodology that I'm going to use here is, my idea is to convert the first Zigbee bridge into a router, which will be relatively easy courtesy of an article that DigiBlur had wrote. And I'm going to try to make the other Zigbee Bridge Pro a router as well. There is a hex file now that you can get that I will try to flash onto the bridge and see if it works. Otherwise, I will leave the Zigbee Bridge Pro as the coordinator and then flash the dongle as a router. I prefer this setup because with the Zigbee dongle, I just don't want anything connected to my Raspberry Pi instance for the interference issues. So using the TCP bridges with the coordinators moves everything away. And then if I use the Zigbee dongle plus as a router, again, I can have it just connected somewhere in my house and not attached to my Raspberry Pi. And that's only possible if it's flashed with the router software. So this is going to provide me with 2 routers and 1 coordinator for my network. And I chose this configuration because I have a main floor and a basement in my present home, and I believe it will provide adequate coverage while avoiding router interference. I'll also be installing Zigbee devices in various rooms around my house, some of which will act as end nodes or devices, and others as routers. So it's going to allow me to manage my lights, plugs, heating, air conditioning in that area, which will contribute to the reliability of the entire mesh network. Once all these devices are configured, I will be able to utilize Home Assistant as a single control point to monitor and operate all of the network connected devices, and I will be installing them in such a way that I still have local physical control. So if a Zigbee switch is going to control my lights, I'm going to have a physical switch in that room that I'll be able to press so that if my coordinator goes down and I don't have access to controlling it through Home Assistant, I will still be able to turn my lights on and off, provided that I don't have all my routers and coordinator go down at the same time. So as I mentioned, we're going to convert the Zigbee Bridge and not the Zigbee Bridge Pro over to a router instead of coordinator. So just navigate over to your Zigbee Bridge IP address and you should be presented with this menu. And the first thing we're going to do is just ensure that we have the most recent firmware. So from this main menu here, we're just going to click on Configuration and then click on Configure Module. And then in the drop-down list, we're going to search for a Sonoff Zigbee Bridge, and in brackets, it'll be 75, which we see right here. And then click Save. If you don't have, if you don't see this Sonoff Zigbee Bridge 75 in your list, then you do need to upgrade to the latest firmware version of Tasmodo. And you can do that before I click Save. I'll just back out here. You can do that by upgrading your firmware, and this OTA URL we would change out. So it's going to have the following. We would just change out this URL to this one, which will just be tasmodo-zb bridge or zbridge.bin. And that's here. The link will be provided in the description, and then click on Start Upgrade and it will update to the latest firmware, but I already have it. So just going back to the main menu here, again, configuration, configure module, and I am going to switch it to the Sonoff Zigbee Bridge 75 and click Save. That's going to make some changes and the device is going to restart. Perfect. So now that it has been placed back into its default, now we just download the router firmware from DigiBlur's GitHub account, which was forked from Theo Arnen's and made available by XSP 1989. Don't right click and save. Instead, click on the file and then click on the download option. So to understand what I'm talking about here, let me just pull up that page. So don't just right click here and save link as, actually click on the file, and then down here we'll click download, And now once it's been downloaded, we can return back to our Tasmodo menu here, and then we can click on the firmware upgrade, and we're going to upgrade by file upload, the file that we just downloaded. So I'll just go ahead and choose that file. And then we just click this start upgrade, and it's going to take some time. So we just have to wait for it to finish. But once it's finished, it will reboot itself. When it returns, we're going to go into the console. If we get an error regarding Zigbee state being aborted, it says, don't worry. This indicates that the router firmware is operational. And then we're going to simply apply a template to give our new router the ability to pair devices from either the Tasmodo GUI or from the device's pairing button on the Zigbee bridge itself. So we're just going to navigate over to consoles and then console. And then we're going to paste the following command into the console. And this will be linked in the description. And here we go. We can see the Zigbee state abort stopping. So we'll just hit enter, and the device should now reboot and come back up in the console. And then it'll be ready to be paired with the Zigbee network. I guess it doesn't automatically reboot. We'll have to reboot it ourselves. So we'll just go back to the main menu here and click on restart. So now with this router in the desired location of your home, you can power it up. I left mine where it was. So to enable pairing for your Zigbee network, as you would normally pair a regular sensor or switch and stuff like that. So to place this device into a pairing mode, you can use a paperclip to briefly push the pairing button next to the USB power plug on the Zigbee bridge. And the green LED should light up. And then after about 5 or 6 seconds, press that pairing button again. This will turn the green LED off and put the device into pairing mode. And another way that you can do this is right here on this page. You can use this toggle 1 button and leave it on. So if we click it, and we can leave it on for 5 or 6 seconds before turning it off. And now that router is in pairing mode and will pair to a coordinator that you have running. And right now I don't have a coordinator. So it's just setting this up, and we'll come back and configure everything. So this toggle 1 is the same thing as using the paperclip method on the physical device itself. And this toggle 2, just keep in mind that this button is for the Zigbee chipset reboot button, and pressing it will reset the Zigbee chipset. So we're just going to leave that one alone. Okay, so let's move on to Zigbee Dongle 3, as that is also going to be converted to a router. And my coordinator is going to be the Zigbee Bridge Pro. Okay, so as I was mentioning, we will add that coordinator to Home Assistant. So my Zigbee Pro is using this IP address here. So we will come over to Settings, Devices and Services, and we're going to add the integration for Zigbee Home Automation. And we're going to select the Zigbee Home Automation, and we're going to enter manually. The Zigbee Pro is using ZNP, so I will select ZNP for the radio. And the socket path is going to be socket : / and then the IP address. And the port of 8888, and we are using hardware flow control, and click submit. For whatever reason, it didn't start, so I'll just re-enter the TCP start. And now, so we're going to just keep the radio network settings, and it'll initialize and add, and as soon as it does, I will just bring the video right back. All right, with our coordinator now added, but we can click on the one device and then click on add devices to this. So we put our coordinator into a search, and then we click on our router and we toggle this on, wait 5 or 6 seconds, and then toggle it off. And now when we come back, we see that our Zigbee router is being picked up. So I will just rename this to Zigbee router, and you can select the area that it is in your home, and I will exit the pairing mode. So now we see the two devices. So if we go to our Zigbee coordinator here and view network, we can see that our coordinator is now connected to the router. And now we just have to pair our other router. So in order to do that, just like in the previous video, what we're going to have to do is type Python, and I will provide a link for this. We have to download the router software, and it is following the same naming convention. So it's this Launchpad router. So back in that terminal, in the same folder as our Python file, which is this one here, our router hex file has to be in the same. So then we would just type Python and then the name of our Python file and the port, which you can find how to do this in my previous video. And then the flags EBW, and then bootloader -sonoff -USB, and then the name of the hex file. And then hit enter. It will write our router software to the dongle. And then the same thing, we just have to put it into a pairing mode. So first we'll put the coordinator into a search, and then we will initiate the pairing mode for the router. And on the Zigbee dongle, you just have to power it off and power it back on. And there we go. We now have our Zigbee dongle router, and leave pairing mode. And now we see we have our two routers and our coordinator. So if we go back into our coordinator now, so this is the process that you want to do, is start with your coordinator, then pair your routers. And if we go back to the network visualization, now we can start to see a mesh network being formed between our coordinators and our routers. So the coordinator is connected to each router, and the routers have connected themselves to each other. So if the coordinator goes down, the two routers will still see each other. So now at this point, we can start pairing devices the same way. We will add devices, and then we just put those devices into a pairing mode. And now we can see the devices being picked up, so we can call that whatever we want. Select an area. We'll just say it's the kitchen. Go out. And now if we look at our network, and refresh our topology, we'll start to see it building its network, mesh network. And like I said, this is the best scenario. So if my coordinator goes down, or for whatever reason I have to restart Home Assistant, I will still have local control over my Zigbee devices, because they will still be able to talk to each other through the routers. And another thing that you should do is, after you have your network all set up and everything is paired, is under the network tab at the top here, you should download a backup. That way, if your coordinator dies and you have to get a new one, you can load your new coordinator, and then you will be able to upload that backup and not have to pair all of your devices. And if you have a lot of devices, that could save you hours, if not days, running around and putting everything into pairing mode. So there, the backup has completed. And if we just go back to the visualization, now we can see that the coordinator is connected directly to the temperature device. However, it will form a mesh with the routers. And if the coordinator goes down, it will self-heal, and instead of going through the coordinator, you'll see links get connected to the router. Now, if you want to use the Zigbee Bridge Pro as a router and the Zigbee dongle as your coordinator, or just the regular Zigbee Bridge as your coordinator, you will have to switch the Zigbee Bridge Pro to router software. So in order to do that, you will need this hex file here for the Zigbee Bridge Pro router, and you would just click on this file and then click on the download. And once you have that file downloaded, you'll just go to your Zigbee Bridge Pro and then go into consoles and then manage file system. You'll select the file and then click start upload, and then the process will be the same. Instead of using the coordinator hex file, you'd replace it with the router hex file, and you can follow all of the instructions that are in the video on flashing the Zigbee Bridge Pro, with the exception of, like I said, changing out the coordinator hex file here and putting in the name of this router hex file instead. All right, my friends, this is where I'm going to leave the video. So if you've made it this far, I really appreciate you. If you haven't yet, please click subscribe. I love making these videos, but they do take up quite a bit of my time, researching, filming, and editing. So by subscribing, you'll help support the channel. I hope you've discovered something useful today. As always, please share your thoughts in the comment section. and I hope to see you in future videos. Goodbye.